two of this video is I'm going to deal with the emotional aspects of getting raw, of going to raw food, because like most of the plant the raw vegan presenters will note on YouTube, that there can be an associated emotional shift when you abandon cooked foods and start eating only raw. So I'm going to address that in part 2, along with a particular yoga pose, because I wanted to introduce yoga into the mix. And I'm also going to introduce astrology. Astrology, like I say in part 2 in the beginning, is very bastardized. It's been taken over by an industry, that has basically raked all of its practical value right out of it. And so I currently am working on a book about astrology, my experience with it over the last 30 years. So anyways, that's what I'm going to get into in this video, part 1 and part 2. So let's get on with part 2. So one thing I wanted to talk about was, you hear a lot about, from the presenters on the internet, you hear a lot about this kind of emotional purging that might occur if you become raw. There's something about giving up cooked food, giving up all that quote-unquote comfort, emotionally based, that you've been doing all your life. And quite frequently there can be some sort of emotional purging. Well, I did go through a process after becoming a raw vegan, a high-fat raw vegan. And that process involved becoming hypersensitive to chemicals. It got really severe for me. I was unable to walk into a carpeted room without almost passing out from dizziness, from the formaldehyde, being gassed off from the undercarriage of the carpet, from the, that foam. I couldn't sleep on a pillow that was a foam pillow. There were many, many things that I could not do that just really disturbed my whole existence in an extreme way. I couldn't handle any type of chemical, period. If there was a bottle of bleach underneath the sink in a house I was in, I couldn't go into that room. I would get completely knocked out. I'd get headache, violent headaches and all kinds of stuff, shortness of breath and all this kind of stuff. And as it was, as I found out only recently, Clorox bleach is considered a #1 poison by first responders, paramedics. It's a Class A poison. And oddly enough, the 3 days before my father passed away, I encountered him in his garage cleaning a bathroom carpet, throw rug that had been, damaged or stained up, and he had the thing in a bucket of Clorox, and he was, brushing it and cleaning it, and right down in it he was breathing all this Clorox, And I said, hey, Dad, that stuff is really toxic, because I couldn't be anywhere near it. And of course, he had by that point he was 89 years old. He had a condition that was had to do with the deterioration of his arteries, and they could have done surgery on him, but he didn't want to because it was so extensive. They would have cut him all up, and he didn't want to go through that. So, anyways, he was cleaning this carpet for probably, who knows, 45 minutes. He was breathing all this Clorox. And he goes, and when I made that comment to him, he said, oh, no, it's great. It actually clears up my sinuses. And I just went, I'm not going to be able to convince him to watch that one. Well, 3 days later, he was dead. He died in his sleep. And I'm convinced that of course, it was the Clorox, the toxic fumes from the Clorox that triggered the probably collapse of some artery and affected his passing. But yeah, so I went through this whole thing, and it got so severe. I mean, I was totally focused on it. And as I found out after reading a book by somebody, authored by somebody who had the same experience, a large part of it was your focus. Now, as I understood it, after cleansing and doing raw vegan food, your body starts to get, detoxified. And I read in more than one source that as you detoxify and your body becomes cleaner, chemicals are actually attracted to you. Impurities are actually attracted into your body through air or whatever. So when you go into a room and somebody's using some caustic cleaning thing, or there's carpet, or there's some, some kind of gas or something, you're in a garage or whatever, exhaust, that stuff just comes to you like a magnet. And I was getting really sick from it. And this went on for, I don't know, a couple of years. I'm pretty well convinced now that the raw vegan thing induced that, okay? And it induced it as a message that I needed to stay away from those kind of things and use, natural products, even toilet paper. Unbleached toilet paper. I couldn't use conventional toilet paper, because it hurt, right? So there were many things like that. I could not wear any kind of synthetic material. I couldn't wear nylon, any of that stuff. I couldn't use any chemicals on my skin. I couldn't use shampoo that had chemicals in it. So I had to go totally natural with everything that was in my life. And I discovered that really, I was in Santa Barbara at the time, that Santa Barbara, California, and many Californian cities are extremely toxic in terms of the chemicals that exist in the atmosphere and in the environment. So that was one of my inducements to get out of there. So part of this had to be emotional, okay? There was a certain amount of, victimization kind of syndrome in there, and there was certainly this intense focus on this because I was so worried that everywhere I go, everything I touched was chemically caustic to me and was going to cause me pain. And then I discovered through this book that part of it was focus, right? Well, I had that piece, but I didn't have the way to fix that. I couldn't really take my focus off of that. And once you get focused on something like that, there's no getting out of it, really, And it becomes sort of an emotional phenomena. So, by luck again, at some point, after I left Santa Barbara, I ran into a book, which I still have, I still retain. It's called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. And it's here, I'll show that so you get a good look at it. And the presence process is all about integrating your unintegrated emotions. Most of your emotions come from when you were a childhood and you had conditional love, okay? And they actually became part of you physically, these emotions. And if you want to get rid of them truly, you have to be able to integrate them. And the presence process, he's got a website, I think it's called The Presence Process. This is a means of getting to those emotions and integrating them. I highly recommend it. It is not necessarily easy, but it's very rewarding. And I did it 3 times over a period of about a year or two. I did this presence process, which I believe, if I remember correctly, it's it's like an 8 or 10 week process, and it doesn't involve changing your life. It involves, first of all, accessing the emotions that you have pent up, the childhood emotions that are still with you physically, and accessing those and dealing with them and passing them off and integrating them, you know. And it was this process that pulled me out of this extreme chemical sensitivity. When I finally, stepped away from the presence process, I had basically conquered that whole thing, right? Because I must have integrated most of the emotions that had me getting so hung up on this whole idea of being, attacked by these chemicals everywhere that I went. That doesn't mean that I engage these chemicals now, because I don't. I still avoid them, but the severity of it is totally, almost non-existent. I mean, I don't, when I fill a weed whacker up with gasoline, I definitely do it at a distance, but, before having done the presence process, I couldn't even get near a machine that had, petrochemicals in it. So that was a big thing in my progression, is this whole thing about, an emotional state, unintegrated emotions that you acquire in childhood that follow you through your life. Integrating those with something like the presence process. Definitely, the presence process is an amazing book. Michael Brown just did an amazing job of getting into this. He cured himself of some very rare disease that had him totally dysfunctional. He cured himself and created. It took him a couple of years to do it, and he did it. And he wrote a book. He organized the whole process that he went through into like this 10-week program that takes you through your unintegrated emotions. So that was a big thing for me.